On our first episode of our podcast, The Bridge to Knowledge with David Burrell, we'll lay out the expectations you can have from us, and as well as provide a groundwork, a foundation of some of the economic and financial tools you'll use to navigate your personal financial world, as well as to share an understanding of the underlying principles behind so much of what you read and hear regarding the policies that could shape our future and have shaped our past. So welcome aboard and stay tuned for The Bridge to Knowledge with David Burrell, helping you get from where you are to where you want to go. Hello and welcome to The Bridge to Knowledge with David Burrell, helping you get from where you are to where you want to go. Now, this podcast is all about empowering you with the insights and tools to take control of your finances. Since this is our first episode, let me prepare you on what to expect. If you needed something to listen to on a drive, say from New York to Boston, go listen to Joe Rogan or Dan Carlin or one of those other long-form podcasts. That should take you the whole trip. If you're just looking for something to listen to as you get dressed in the morning, well, we got you covered. Today, we're going to lay the groundwork. And why does this matter? Well, because without a solid foundation, everything else crumbles. Can you build a bridge without preparing the ground underneath? Of course not. What we're doing with this episode is to prepare the ground below the bridge to knowledge. Anyone who knows anything about building bridges knows that you have to start with the foundation. At least that's what I imagine a bridge builder would say. And so it is with any discipline. Knowledge begins with a shared language. We learn a common language to discuss things without constantly having to revert to full-blown explanations. Every discipline has a language. Parenting, biology, and so does economics and finance. I was sitting next to a woman at the Super Bowl party who said after the Eagles scored their first of many touchdowns, "I hope he makes this field goal." Now, I get her concern over the consistency of Jake Elliott, the Eagles kicker, but a field goal is 3 points, whereas the PAT, the point after the touchdown, is the 1-point kick she was hoping he would make. And by the way, Elliott missed only one PAT all season and was perfect in both PATs and field goals during the playoffs. So to enjoy a football game, you have to learn the definitions of a blitz, which does not mean bombing London, encroachment, which is not something Putin did to Ukraine, and tush-push, which is not something that would get your face slapped in a bar. So rather than build your personal finances or even make our public choices on nothing more than gut feelings or advice from the media, we're going to explore the foundational principles, learn a common language, and even gather some of the analytical tools you can use for making decisions about the rest of your life. So let's get on with it. But first, before we jump into today's main topic, let's tackle our question of the day. In every episode, we'll start with a question of the day, and if you'd like to get in on the fun, go to our website and submit your question, and we'll address it in a future episode. Today's question comes from John of Abington. And let me point out that, if you want to go to our website, it's www.bridge2k.com. That's bridge, the number 2, and the letter K, as in knowledge. So back to Sir John of Abington. He asks, David, how old should one be to begin financial planning? Well, when should you start to plan for your financial future? Just like the Super Bowl winning coach Nick Sirianni of the Philadelphia Eagles, let me answer this with a gardening analogy that almost nobody will fully understand. Stay with me on this. I want to eat an apple that I grew on my own tree in my own backyard, but I never planted an apple tree. Now, if I go to the tree store, which I think they now call nurseries, I can get a spindly stick of an apple tree, which, if I'm lucky, will produce an apple in about 5 years. So let me ask you, John, when should I have planted the apple tree? Obviously, 5 years ago, but I didn't. So when's the next best time to plant a tree? And people tell themselves, I'll start planning for my financial future after I make some money, or after I pay off my house or my college loans, or as I plan, as I get closer to a retirement, or maybe even after the kids die. But there's an old saying in the financial game, it's not the timing of the markets that matters, it's the time in the markets that matter. You start as early as you can and adjust as you go. Financial planning is a lot like planting a tree. When was the best time? Yesterday. When's the next best time? Now. See, if you don't get started, you'll never get there. You can't wait for all the signs to point favorably in your direction before you ever get started. You have to start now. If you want to drive from the East Coast to Los Angeles, you can't sit in your driveway waiting for all the traffic lights to turn green. You have to get moving. So start small, start now, but start. And now for a quick word from one of our many sponsors, because even podcasters gotta eat, you know.
This episode is brought to you by Keystone Asset Management Strategies. As the principal of KeyAMS, David Barol is passionate about helping you achieve your financial goals with confidence. Whether you're just starting your journey toward financial independence, preparing for retirement, or planning your legacy, his personalized strategies are tailored to meet your unique needs. Financial security doesn't happen by accident. It requires a partner with the expertise and dedication to help you navigate life's financial complexities. Visit keyams.net today to explore how KeyAMS might be able to help you create a secure future for yourself and your loved ones. Let's take the next step together. Now, back to the show.
As promised, let's build the foundation for the rest of the series. The first concept we'll go over is the difference between normative and empirical statements. Now, some of this is going to sound like you're back in college, right? And this is presuming that you paid attention to these courses in college or even took them, right? I should know I didn't pay attention, so what I've had to do is learn these since then. But I think the concepts here are very helpful for us in looking at the world outside and looking at what we do in our own personal finances. So bear with me and let's trudge on through. So the first set of questions or set of concepts are the difference between normative and empirical statements. So we don't want to make this podcast a partisan debate. Whoever you voted for is fine with me. We welcome all perspectives and opinions. All right? We had a cafe during COVID, and during that period of 2020 to 2024, obviously things are very political. And I used to say, I don't care if you're blue or if you're red, as long as your money is green. So our podcast is going to talk about the green stuff, which is money. Your money or the public's money. Anyway, so our goal is to provide a foundation of empirical evidence and tools to analyze the evidence so you can form your own conclusions. That's the distinction between normative statements, which reflect personal values and beliefs, and empirical statements, which are grounded in data and objective analysis. We'll present the facts and how to analyze the facts. Then you can apply your belief system and your values to decide what they mean. So in my real life outside of the studio, I'm as opinionated as the next guy. I often say things that cause people around me to roll their eyes. I'll see a lawn sign or a bumper sticker that makes me shake my head in disbelief. Well, my head in disbelief. I only have one head. I have biases, prejudices, opinions. But on this podcast, I'm not going to try to jam any opinion down your throat. For example, you might opine that the late President James Carter was a great president and a greater man. Or you might conclude he was the worst president in history, with maybe the exception of Pennsylvania's own James Buchanan for that distinction. But those are opinions. That's not what the show's about. Now, we may remind you that Carter committed adultery on his lovely wife Rosalind in his heart, unlike the next Democratic president who used other body parts to commit adultery. Carter disgorged his natural urges across the pages of Playboy magazine, whereas Clinton disgorged his urges across Monica Lewinsky's blue dress. But these are not opinions, these are facts, although they're uncomfortable facts. On this show, we'll aim for empirical information and not normative opinions. When we have a statement to make, we're going to try to be able to base it on empirical evidence and data and then analyze the data. All right? So, and by the way, I did vote for both of those men, so I don't want to be hypocritical. The next concept, guns versus butter. This used to be a much larger part of the debate. But what this means, when you hear guns versus butter, is that do we spend our attention and our money on domestic production, like making more butter, or do we fund the military and make more guns? So this is something that's been driving public policy a lot, and we're not always aware of that. For example, when we expand NATO, we are requiring those countries to have a uniform military that can be interchanged with the rest of NATO. So now we have to spend more money on guns, and since the United States is the supplier of that, we are taking tax dollars and then buying more armaments, and that helps us expand NATO. That is squeezing out private spending, such as we would buy for more butter or more eggs. So whenever we look at federal policies, we may want to think in terms of guns versus butter. Another concept for us to look into is a term called ceteris paribus. Now that's Latin. I took Latin with Mr. Villarreal, and I don't remember anything. But no, he was a great teacher. The Latin phrase ceteris paribus means all things being equal. And it's a way to understand a very complex world by breaking down the equation into one variable at a time. For example, all things being equal, if you increase the money supply, you'll increase prices. One goes up, it's the equation. One goes up, the other goes up. But then you say, oh, well, the world's more complicated than that. There are all sorts of variables that could go up and down. And yes, that's true. But ceteris paribus, if you create more dollars chasing around the same number of goods, people will bid up the prices of those goods until the number of sellers equals the number of buyers. Ceteris paribus, all things being equal. More money in circulation will cause the price of goods to go up. So we're not suggesting that one relationship between a dependent and an independent variable, that answers everything, but it helps us address that particular relationship. So all things being equal, if I eat moderately and exercise daily, I'll live a longer and healthier life. Now, it doesn't mean I won't get hit by a bus tomorrow, but it does tell me something about the factors I can control, what goes into the equation and what comes out. We can't predict everything, which is why being flexible in both our personal, financial, and in our national policy is so important. A plan is not a written document you keep on a shelf. You need to account for uncertainty. Always remember Mike Tyson's advice. Everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. Well, anyway, speaking of uncertainty, let's talk about something called confidence intervals. Now, this concept explains that to understand life, we have to look at a range of possible outcomes rather than a single point. So, for example, if I invest $100 in a stock, I can expect a 5% return or 10% return, or I could lose 12%. If I take the arithmetic mean of those three outcomes, I'll come up with 1%. But how does that help us? What would help us is to know that if I invest in this stock, I could expect a return between 6 and 12%, 80% of the time. And that means 20% of the time, 100% minus 80, 20% of the time, I won't fall within that range, right? So here's a real life example of that. I took a class called Decision Analysis with a man named Howard Rafa. And if you look him up, you'll see that he actually wrote the book on this subject. I mean, he literally wrote the book. So you can imagine what it was like taking the class. So I figured that with all the tuition I was paying, I should at least get 15 minutes of his time by visiting him and other professors. So I signed up to see him during his office hours. When I sat down inside his office, he was on the phone saying to the person on the other end, "I'll see you for lunch with an 80% probability that I'll get there between 12:23 and 12:37. At least that's how I remember how the conversation went. Anyway, rather than say, "I'll see you at 12:30, a precise time he probably could not have met given the uncertainties of traffic, parking, a loquacious grad student, he gave a truthful answer, one that he felt reasonably, but not 100%, confident of meeting. Again, he gave a range of equally possible outcomes. He was as likely to get there at 12:28 as he was at 12:34 or 12:36. The midpoint, 12:30, was just one point in the range, no more or less likely an outcome. Right? I use this all the time. For example, the cost of writing a living trust in Pennsylvania, given an 80% confidence interval, is between $1,860 and $3,140. Now, if we ask how much 1,000 random trusts written in Pennsylvania would cost, 800 of those would fall between $1,860 and $3,140. That means 200 would be either higher or lower than that range. It doesn't mean that the average of those two endpoints, which is $2,500, is what we should go into a lawyer's office and expect to pay. The average number does not predict the outcome any more than any of the other 800 round numbers within that range. Yet we're programmed to take comfort in the midpoint. Don't give me a range, tell me the cost. So we say the cost will be $2,500, but that specific number will most likely be wrong. Imagine me saying, I drive to work on the right side of the road and I drive home on the left side. So if I average the two trips, where am I driving? Down the middle of the road. But that's not true. It's not true any of the time. 100% of the time, I'm driving either in the left or the right lanes. I never drive in the average lane. So when you want to know if your assets are enough to retire, realize that we'll have a mix of outcomes, mostly we hope falling within a narrow band. I'm 80% likely that I'll retire at age 68 and I have enough money to last me between ages 88 and 92, right? Rather than say, I have enough money to last to 90, because we just don't know what's going to happen. Confidence intervals give us the clarity to move forward and the flexibility to adjust as needed. So we have more riveting information for you, but first, a quick word from one of our many sponsors.
This episode is brought to you by Bala House Publishing, where stories of adventure and resilience come to life. Available on Amazon and wherever fine books are sold, The Long Green Tunnel, Book 1 of the Notes from the Trail series by David Barol, is an inspiring journey along the Appalachian Trail. Discover the challenges, triumphs, and profound reflections of these wanderers on their quest for adventure and self-discovery. With vivid imagery and heartfelt storytelling, Barol invites readers to explore the transformative power of facing the fury and wonder of nature. Get your copy and start your adventure today. Bala House Publishing, where every book is an invitation to explore. Now, back to the show.
Next up, opportunity costs. This is the value of what you have to give up when making a choice. Let's say you're debating between a dream vacation and maxing out your 401k contributions. The opportunity cost of that vacation isn't just the $5,000 you spend on the trip. It's the future value of what that $5,000 would have earned if invested. Another way of looking at this, remember the phrase that saying yes to one thing means saying no to something else. This is true when you accept a board position in your community garden club or purchase a new pair of shoes. Spending time or money affects you in the moment as well as what that time or money could have produced later. Now, on to the next idea, marginal analysis. This tool helps you evaluate incremental decisions. For example, imagine you're considering working overtime. your average tax rate is 20%, meaning that you owe $20,000 on $100,000 of income, or $10,000 on 50, and so on like that. But your marginal tax rate is not 20%. It's whatever the rate would be on the next dollar you earn. So the rate could be 30%, even though the average tax was 20%. The average does not tell you what your trade-off is on your next incremental hour of work. If that extra hour pays you $50 in revenue, you'll net $35, 70% of what you earned. Is that worth your time? Will you trade that extra hour away from your family dog or your family just for another $35 more in your pocket? Maybe you would, or maybe you wouldn't. I'm not judging. I just want you to remember that it is the marginal benefit that matters, not the average benefit, right? So how do you value that extra hour? Well, marginal analysis argue that you should engage in an activity up until the moment when the marginal benefit equals the marginal cost. After I've had 2 steak dinners this week, I value the third steak dinner at $25. The price of that dinner, though, is $50. So it's clear that the cost of that dinner is higher than what I am willing to pay. So building on that idea, there's something called the law of marginal diminishing returns and the laws of marginal diminishing utility. So the law of marginal diminishing returns describes the decrease in the incremental output for an incremental increase in input. So what I mean by that is, let's say you can write 10 pages on your novel in 5 hours, and you can write 12 pages in 6 hours, right? Is there a fall off in production as you increase the hours, right? How many pages could you write if you sat there for 8 hours? So is it a linear improvement, or is there a diminishing return on the amount of input you put in there, right? Now, of course, you have to take all that with every other factor held constant. For instance, after the 5th hour, you turn to artificial intelligence, your chat GPT, and it all of a sudden writes 20 pages for you. So you can't count that. That's where the idea of ceteris paribus comes in. But the idea is, let's take a look at government regulation. Congress wants to make sure that people offering financial advice remain current concerning their anti-money laundering activities or dealing with seniors. And the securities regulators, they're in order the broker-dealers to require 1 or 2 hour courses on each subject. But then the Labor Department steps in and they offer even more regulations on how many hours of courses. And eventually what happens is 2 courses become 4 and 4 become 8. And at what point do these additional courses and the cost of developing and implementing them and regulating them no longer add to the knowledge of the advisors and the safety of the consumers? Does the advisor learn and retain as much from the 5th course as she did from the 3rd or from the 2nd? Will she retain as much from the 7th as she did from the 6th? See, this is an example of how the same input does not produce the same output. Common sense, isn't it? So that is the concept behind the law of marginal diminishing returns. My father used to say, and he used to quote Supreme Court Justice Brandeis, who actually was one who said, "I could do 12 months' work in 11, but I can never do 12 months' work in 12. Working that extra month would not have made him as productive as taking that month off to recharge. Similarly, the law of marginal diminishing utility means that the additional pair of shoes or the 8th beer will not provide the same pleasure as the 1st or 2nd. When you combine this with the opportunity cost, you can make decisions that will improve your financial status. If you think about it, the 8th pair of shoes costs the same amount of money as the 1st pair. But buying those shoes might be a good idea because you remember how thrilled you were at the 1st pair, but realistically, does owning the 8th pair give you the same joy? Or will it gather dust on a shelf? And could that $50 or $100 if invested, provide you with greater joy during your retirement when you need the money to purchase a higher grade of cat food to eat? So that's the law of marginal diminishing utility, just something to think about as you go through your life. Now next, let's turn to the law of unintended consequences. This describes outcomes of actions that are not anticipated or intended. These outcomes can be positive, negative, or neutral, often resulting from the complexity of systems and the difficulty in predicting interactions between variables. It highlights the importance of considering secondary effects when making decisions. Just don't make a decision and say, oh, I'm done. You got to think it through. So here's an example in personal finance. A person dedicates a portion of their income to pay off debt, but does not adjust their spending, so keeps borrowing, increasing the debt. So I have all this debt, I'm going to put 20% off to pay off the debt, but now I don't have enough money left in order to live, and therefore I have to increase my debt. So the unintended consequence of using so much of an income to pay off the money we owe is that winds up with even more debt. Another example, public policy. Rent control, like up in New York or in San Francisco. What that is intended to do is to make housing affordable. That's empathy from our city council people towards people who can't afford to rent places. So rent control aims to make housing affordable. But it discourages landlords from maintaining properties or building new units. As a result, there are fewer houses and fewer apartments over time. So rent control, instead of fixing the problem, actually makes it worse. That's an example of an unintended consequence. Finally, let's explore efficiency versus equity. Efficiency is about maximizing results, while equity focuses on fairness. Nearly every public policy matter focuses on the clash between these concepts. Let's take taxes, for example. A flat tax might be efficient, but is it fair? Voters don't think so, so they support a progressive tax, progressive income tax at least, which imposes a higher tax rate on those who earn more. Now, a national sales tax would mean that people who buy more pay more in taxes, but a progressive income tax means that people who earn more pay not only more in taxes, but also do so at an increasing rate. So that's the difference between flat and progressive. Problem is, it takes a lot of effort to monitor a tax system that becomes more and more increasingly complicated. So a flat tax, which simply is a simple 20% tax on all your income, which is how Hong Kong operated, that's much more cost-effective in terms of administering. But the argument against that is that a couple arguments. One is that people who are making more and have more wealth, so they should pay a higher percentage, and that is called equity. Whereas the argument in favor of a flat tax is efficiency. So we've learned earlier in our discussion that a higher marginal tax on hours worked actually will lead to people making that labor-leisure trade-off. I'd rather have more spare time than to only make a little bit of money by working another hour. So as a result, some of the most productive people in our economy might work less with a progressive rate. So these are the arguments back and forth, the efficiency versus equity. Let's take a look at healthcare. Should resources be allocated to those who contribute the most or those who need it the most? So our Canadian healthcare system is based on societal membership, not the ability or willingness to pay. This is fair, but isn't efficient. If I'm willing to pay more for a life-saving surgery, I still have to wait behind someone seeking a less urgent procedure, especially since the surgeons have no incentive to prioritize me. So government officials might want to add safeguards to that system, but public health care, at best, poorly replicates what the free market system does naturally. And yet, when it comes to health care, is it equitable that some people receive better treatment simply because they have more money? So that is, again, the struggle that we face between equity and efficiency. So understanding these trade-offs are at the heart of public policy. Equity versus efficiency, if you keep that in mind, can help you evaluate public policies so that you make informed decisions about the candidates that are proposing it one way or the other. I'm not telling you which side to go on, but just keep that in mind as you evaluate policies and evaluate the people who you're electing to pitch those policies. So why should you care? How does that fit into personal finance? Well, understanding that the trade-offs are at the heart of public policy. So the taxes that pay for this will play a vital role in your ability to live independently for the rest of your life. Remember, it's not how much money you make that matters, it's how much money you get to keep. And that's a wrap. Today we explored the language behind economics and finance so that we can make better decisions regarding our personal finances and the policies that drive our country and its economy. You know, I used to tell people that my wife and I split decisions in an equitable way. I made all the really important decisions. She made all the minor decisions. She made the minor decisions such as, where we're going to live, where our kids go to school, what we're going to eat, what we're going to drive. And I made the major decisions like whether we should go to war, invade Greenland, or impose tariffs. So I had the major decisions, she had all the minor decisions. Anyway, what we're going to do as we go further into the future is use some of these underlying concepts and take a look at our world, both as personal investors and as citizens in our society. So don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the Bridge to Knowledge. Give it to all your friends. And until next time, keep building that bridge from where you are to where you want to go. Bye-bye now.
David Burrell is the principal of Keystone Asset Management Strategies. He holds multiple securities registrations and investment licenses, including Series 7 General Securities Representative, Series 24 Securities Principal, Series 53 Municipal Securities Principal, Series 63 Uniform Securities Agent State Law, and Series 65 Investment Advisor Representative. He also holds the following professional designations: Certified Financial Planner, CFP, Chartered Life Underwriter, CLU, Chartered Financial Consultant, CHFC, Behavioral Finance Advisor, BFA. David earned his undergraduate degree from the University of Virginia and a master's in public policy from the Kennedy School at Harvard University. Securities and advisory services offered through Creative One Securities LLC, member FINRA SIPC, and an investment advisor. Keystone Asset Management Strategies and Creative One Securities LLC are not affiliated.